Artemis II is not waiting on the launch pad anymore. It is already in flight. On April 1, 2026, 4 astronauts left Earth inside Orion, and by flight day 5, the planet already looks smaller in the windows. That detail matters because it changes the kind of fear this mission is built around. Most people picture the obvious dangers first: a rocket exploding, a capsule burning up, some cinematic disaster over the moon. But once a crew is already on the way, that is not how the fear really works. Trained astronauts fear margins, procedures, and quiet failure chains. They fear the moment the mission stops being spectacle and becomes a series of systems that all have to keep doing their job. And Artemis II reaches that point fast. Within about a day of launch, Orion performed its trans-lunar injection burn and committed the crew to a free return path around the moon. That sounds elegant. It is. But it also means the safest version of this mission is still a version where you are now hundreds of thousands of kilometers from Earth inside a single spacecraft with no nearby rescue option. That is the first hard stake here. Not panic. Dependence. The mission gives away its real 4 points in the tasks NASA chose to practice. On flight day 1, the crew manually flew Orion around the spent upper stage in a proximity operations demonstration. On flight day 4, Christina Cook and Jeremy Hansen took manual control again in deep space, testing Orion's handling for 41 minutes. None of that looks scary in the movie version of spaceflight, but that is exactly the point. Astronauts are not mainly afraid of the camera-friendly moments. They are afraid of the quiet demonstrations that prove whether the spacecraft behaves the way the checklist said it would, because future lunar missions will ask even more of those same controls. Then there's the environment itself. Artemis II is the first crewed mission in half a century to go beyond Earth's protective magnetic field and head into deep space around the moon. Once you do that, the sun stops being scenery. It becomes an operational problem. NASA and NOAA are monitoring solar activity around the clock during the mission for exactly this reason. Solar flares and coronal mass ejections can trigger solar particle events, and those particles do not arrive like a clean wave you can step around. One NASA radiation analyst compared it to sitting in a bathtub that is gradually filling with water. That image is useful because it captures the real fear. Exposure building while the crew watches the numbers. Inside Orion, 6 cabin sensors measure radiation in different parts of the spacecraft, and each astronaut also wears a personal dosimeter. If those readings rise too high, Orion can issue warnings, and the crew may be told to build shelter inside the cabin itself, moving stowed equipment to the hotter areas to add mass between their bodies and incoming particles. That is such a strange detail to sit with. In deep space, your gear stops feeling like gear. It becomes shielding. The spacecraft is no longer just transportation. It is wall, roof, bunker, and lifeboat, all at the same time. By flight day 5, NASA said the crew was already demonstrating the Orion Crew Survival System suits while preparing for the April 6 lunar flyby. They were doing leak checks, simulating seat entry, testing mobility, even checking whether they could eat and drink in the suits. Mission Control was also planning to lower Orion's cabin pressure to 10.2 psi and hold it there until flight day 8. Those are dry technical details. They are also brutally honest ones, because the boring words in spaceflight are usually attached to the dangerous problems: cabin pressure, suit integrity, mobility, life support. If one of those systems fails far from Earth, the crew does not get a convenient reset. They get the emergency they trained for. That is another thing Artemis II strips away. In low Earth orbit, space is still hostile, but help feels conceptually closer. There is a station. There are cargo vehicles. There are shorter return timelines. Artemis II is different. There is no station nearby. No quick rescue ride. No crowded orbital neighborhood full of backup options. There is Orion, the crew, the checklist, and the discipline to keep small problems from becoming larger ones. That sounds calm. It is calm. But calm is not the opposite of fear out there. Calm is what fear looks like when professionals know exactly what is at stake. And the mission has a moment that makes the stake impossible to ignore. ESA describes the trans-lunar injection burn as a firm commitment point. Once that burn was complete, Orion was no longer going to remain in Earth orbit. The crew was committed to a minimum 8-day path that leads around the moon and only then back home. The phrase free return trajectory sounds reassuring, and it should. It means the mission is designed to swing back without needing a major burn in lunar orbit. But safety is not the same thing as freedom. A free return path gives you a way home. It does not give you an easy exit. Once you are on it, distance becomes part of every decision. That is why the mission's distance milestones matter. NASA says the crew is expected to surpass the Apollo 13 distance record on April 6. People hear that and think of history. Astronauts hear it and think of delay, logistics, and consequence. The farther Orion goes, the more every system issue changes its character. A minor leak is not minor in deep space. A communications hiccup is not just annoying. Fatigue, posture, sleep, food, waste systems, exercise, all the ordinary details inside a small capsule keep mattering because the body does not stop being a body just because the view is magnificent. Then comes one of the clearest fear points in the whole mission, the planned communications blackout behind the moon. NASA's Flight Day 5 update said Mission Control expects to lose contact with Orion around 6:44 p.m. EDT on April 6 as the spacecraft passes behind the moon. NASA's mission agenda describes that blackout as lasting roughly 30 to 50 minutes. That is scheduled. That is normal. And it is still psychologically real, because there is a difference between knowing a blackout is coming and living through it while you are farther from Earth than any humans have been in more than half a century. For that stretch, there is no conversation with Houston, just the crew, the spacecraft, the trajectory, and the trust that the silence will end on time. Even the science work during the flyby carries its own kind of pressure. The crew is expected to photograph and describe lunar features in real time, including during the far side pass, because their observations are part of why Artemis II exists at all. This is not tourism. It is a test flight proving that people can travel into deep space, work there, make decisions there, and come home with the spacecraft and the procedures still performing the way they should. That is why Artemis II fear is not really about the moon as a monster. The moon is just where the mission becomes honest. And NASA built that honesty into the plan. Later in the mission, the crew is scheduled to practice protecting themselves from a high radiation event by building a shelter inside Orion using their own supplies and equipment. Future missions will ask even more: docking, landers, longer stays, more autonomy, less forgiveness. Artemis II is the mission that has to prove the quiet parts first. Can the crew live in the capsule well enough? Can the system stay trustworthy? Can the vehicle be flown manually when needed? Can the mission hold together when Earth is small and the checklist is everything? Those are the fears under the mission patch. When people ask what Artemis II astronauts actually fear, the answer is not some Hollywood version of the moon. It is the quiet stuff. Exposure that builds slowly, hardware that has to stay boringly reliable, procedures that cannot be skipped, and the weight of knowing that once you commit to this path, home is still days away. That is the real thing. Responsibility, dependence, distance. And that is exactly why this mission matters. Artemis II is teaching humans how to leave the part of space where rescue still feels imaginable and enter the part where discipline is the only reason beauty stays beautiful.